Good morning, guys. Welcome to today's training. It's a little later in the day than usual, but I've been chewing on it for a little bit because, well, this is a topic that comes up frequently with all of my clients, with all my students. It's this concept of emotional enmeshment where I know what they feel, that kind of thing. So that's what we're going to be jumping in today a bit. Before we get to that, if you're new to me, welcome. I'm Burtcher, and I help codependents, people who have survived narcissistic relationships, survived neglect, and codependency, rediscover their happiness after codependency, and rediscover who they are and come to know, love, and like who they are, and live their own vision there. So, as combobulated as that sounded, that's what I do. And okay, so now I've got to get this shared out to the community here real quick. The community is your safe haven where you can find support, guidance, people who understand you, who get you. You can find privacy and shelter from your experience, where you can let out, you can share what's going on, and be seen, be believed, and be protected there. So the link is above on Facebook, below on YouTube. If you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. We'll get you out there. Let me get this shared out to the community real quick. Okay, there we go. So, enmeshment. This idea of I know how they feel. This is an extremely common problem. I had it all the time. I wrestled with it for years because I thought that what I felt was what they felt. Because what was going on in my mind is I was simulating how they would feel about what I did or about their situation, rather than just asking them, right? And I did this because I was taught to assume other people's feelings. I was taught to anticipate them and then regulate those feelings so that they didn't have to. So as a child, I was made responsible for regulating adult emotions and actually adult relationships. My stepmother and father did that kind of bullshit. And this taught me to think that I knew how they felt. It taught me to have a massive fantasy about responsibility over their emotions and over their behaviors and their reactions, and that I had a special ability to feel what they felt. Now, this is a really serious issue, guys. Now, I know many of us identify as empaths. We identify as people who can feel other people's feelings. And this is probably going to rub wrong for a little bit, but I want you to lean into it. If you'd open up to it, I think you can find some freedom in discovering truth there for you, because I thought that way for a long, long time. What was really going on is that my mind, my body was simulating their experience. And I was pretty good at it, to the point where I largely could anticipate what people would feel. But the mistake wasn't in that. The mistake was assuming that I was feeling their feelings. And what the brain does when we have that kind of assumption is it assumes responsibility for those feelings, and it also assumes that it might even be the cause of those feelings. This is a breach of boundary and personal autonomy. It is not our job, and it is not our responsibility to do that. It is our job to acknowledge what we think or what we perceive they feel, and then confirm it. This is key, because it gets us out of fantasy and it gets us back into reality. Because part of fantasy is, hey, I know what you feel. I know who you really are. I know what you've really been through. I know what your real problems are, and I know how to fix them. That is bullshit. I'll be really, really blunt on this, because if we're going to be sober and we're going to break free of codependency, we're going to break free of love addiction, we're going to come back to reality, we're going to have happiness again, we have to confront this very, very directly. We do not know those things. We don't. Period. What you can know is what you perceive, and then confirm with them. If they're like, yeah, I was neglected, and you're like, oh, okay, so my perception was on target there. Cool. Keeping aware of your assumptions and your conclusions about other people will keep you out of the fantasy. If you confirm what you perceive, then you get accurate information, which creates integrity, it creates accountability, and it keeps you in your yard and it keeps you out of theirs. Okay? Because when we think we know what someone feels or where they're coming from, a lot of times, especially codependent thinking, we assume responsibility for it. We have to break that habit of responsibility. And the easiest place I have found to do that is to acknowledge that I don't know. So I need to confirm. And then I need to return responsibility back to them for whatever it is that is there. Because these are, unless this is a child that you're raising, this is a child, then you need to guide them into owning their feelings and teach them how to do that and how to grow from it. But if this is a grown-ass adult you're dealing with, it is their job, period. It is never, ever another adult's job to regulate the feelings of another human being. It is never, ever the adult's job to be responsible for the emotional reactions another person has. It is the responsibility of an adult, or a person who has emotional maturity or is growing into that, is to own one's behavior, our behavior, own what we feel, own what we choose, own how we act, and then empathize with the impact of that. Honor the influence it had on them and let them regulate their feelings. Let them choose what they choose. Let them act what they choose to act, or how they choose to act, and let them have their desires. This separation allows you to become autonomous to you and allows them to remain autonomous to them. This is critical to emotional health and mental health in relationship. Because if we're enmeshed with the other person, we're assuming responsibility for their feelings, their choices, and their actions, and we're denying our own. We're displacing ourselves and we're absorbing them. This reverses that process and puts us into a practice of acknowledgement and legitimization, meaning I acknowledge what I feel, what I wanted, what I chose, what I did. I acknowledge what they felt, I acknowledge what I perceive they felt or what they told me they felt. I acknowledge what they did, I acknowledge what they chose, and I acknowledge what they say they desire. That it's important that we keep that in their yard. You do not factually know their feelings or desires or their thoughts. You only know what they tell you. And when you can respect that, it becomes a lot easier to discern reality from the fantasy, because now you're not responsible for what they're thinking or feeling. You're responsible for your thoughts, your feelings, your choices, your actions, your desires, and they are responsible for theirs. That separation allows you to have accountability, connection, understanding, cooperation, negotiation. It's the foundation of fundamental boundary and connection. So out of codependency into autonomy. For in codependency, we think we got to manage those feelings. No, you don't. Your job is to allow people to do what they do. Get out of their way and observe how they respond to you and what you say and what you do. And then you ask the question, how does this align with what I want in my life? How does this align with my well-being? How does this align with my happiness? How does this align with my preferences and my values? And if you're answering yeses, great. If you're answering some yeses and some nos, then there's places to explore. If you're answering no's, then you're dealing with someone who's fundamentally not compatible with you. Regardless of how you feel about them, they're not compatible. Okay? Love is not a reason to commit to someone. Love is a reason, or attraction is a reason to get to discover and understand them. Compatibility is the reason you commit. Okay? So it's a discovery process, not a commitment process that you're going through there. Now, giving up this fantasy can feel really frustrating because you have a lot of accurate information in the past or experiences where you've been on target. That means you're really good at perceiving things, but it doesn't mean that you're always accurate. You got to get a little skeptical there, and you got to move more into a respect pattern, both for yourself and for the other person. What that means is, I perceive that they might be feeling this, or I perceive that this is where they've come from. I need to confirm it. I need to ask. When I can ask and find out if I'm on target or not, now I am generating connection, I'm generating accountability, and I'm generating clarity. Okay? Very, very important, because healthy relationships function on those. Okay? Consent, clarity, and accountability. CCA. So allow yourself to lean into the idea that maybe you don't know what they feel. Maybe you don't know their actual wound or their actual history. And open up to going, okay, I'm willing to acknowledge that I don't know, and that maybe I need to redirect my focus back to me. Because that's the other component of this. Enmeshment's all about them. It's all about what they're feeling and what they're doing. And it's nothing about you. And usually in enmeshment, you start to shame yourself and blame yourself for their feelings, especially when you've been through an abusive dynamic. You think you caused the abuse because your feelings showed up and you said something and then they reacted in an abusive way. When we come from strict ownership, radical ownership, what happens here is that regardless of how you felt, their behavior is unacceptable. Period. You do not deserve abuse because you had a feeling, a complaint, a boundary. Abuse is never warranted. Period. And when we acknowledge that and we allow the separation to happen, then we can start acknowledging what you feel about that experience. Not what you feel about their feelings, not what you think they feel, because that's enmeshment. What you feel about how they treated you, because that's where the truth is. That's what matters first in this, is that, hey, this hurt me. This is unacceptable. Period. This is where we start to move from codependency and enmeshment into advocacy. We come back into sanity and advocacy, and then we can start choosing ourselves first. We are never responsible for another person's abusive behaviors. Period. That is in their yard. People who respond that way have programming that entitles them to displace pain onto others in some form or fashion. Regardless if they're a narcissist or not, they need to own that behavior and they need to correct it. Now, if we've been aggressive or abusive to them, we own the behavior. We own the behavior, but we also have to understand our context. We have to understand the context that sometimes they push us so far past our limits that we do react in an abusive way because we are coming from a place of defense. They may be coming from a place of defense as well in their behavior. The rule of thumb is, the fundamental factor though is that you have to own your behavior, and then you got to correct it. That means, I don't like that behavior. I'm going to change that so it aligns more with who I want to be. That's the hallmark of someone who is willing to grow, who is functioning from a more healthy standpoint, who's willing to own their limits, own poor or bad or unhealthy skills, that kind of thing. Ownership matters. And then empathy matters. We empathize with the impact. We empathize with how our behavior impacted them. Now, if they don't empathize with the impact of their behavior on us, you've got a massive red flag. Zero ownership, zero empathy, you will not have a healthy relationship. You'll have a dictatorship on your hands. Michelle says, I was abusive after the cheating. Well, yeah, I bet. That's an extremely painful experience. And when we don't have skill sets to manage that kind of pain, we're going to do toxic things. That doesn't mean we're a toxic person. It means we're having a toxic reaction to a toxic situation. It still matters that he cheated, though, and he still gets to own that. And you can change your behavior to align with what you would like to do in that kind of situation if it ever occurred again. That's where we grow. But it never, ever excuses their behavior. This is not a score game where, I abused you, you abused me, so now they're neutralized. That doesn't happen. There has to be accountability and empathy implemented. Now, see, you owned it and you stopped. That's what healthy people do. We have limits. And when a healthy person exceeds their limit, they will have an extreme behavior which will fall into a toxic or abusive category. But it's not a systemic pattern with healthy people. They own it, they correct it, they grow. People with toxic thinking and toxic patterns systemically do this. They feel entitled to do it. They're doing it all the time, regardless of whatever story or bullshit they come up with to snowball you on it. Abuse, their trauma doesn't excuse the abusive behavior. What it does is it might explain where they're coming from, but it doesn't entitle them to anything other than accountability. Period. So when it comes back to enmeshment and understanding ourselves, we need to realize that we are assuming knowledge that we do not have until we confirm our hunch or perception. Even if we are on the target, we're right on the nose, it doesn't imply responsibility. Awareness doesn't equal responsibility. Period. Awareness means how does this align to me? We could ask if they want help. We could ask what they're doing in order to do that or to work out their issue. Healthy people aren't going to enmesh themselves in solving other people's problems. They're going to empower that person to solve their problems by redirecting them to professionals, to proper skills, by holding space with them, by empowering them and supporting them in the journey. They're not going to be the practitioner that heals them. Okay? They know their limits and they understand what's appropriate there. So this is important to your sanity, guys. This is important for you to realize that your empathic ability does not mean that you're feeling what they're feeling. It means that you're simulating what you would think or assume they're feeling. It's always best to first confirm your perception and then gain understanding where they're at from their point of view, not from your perception. You want to confirm your perceptions. And lastly, return responsibility for regulating other people's feelings and pain. A lot of times, especially if we've exited relationships and we feel like we hurt that person again, like they have an abandonment issue or something. In reality, if they were abusive and you left, or it was just dysfunctional or it wasn't working for you, you didn't abandon them. Adults don't abandon adults because adults and peer relationships aren't, they're consensual. Okay, abandonment is the process of I didn't have a choice and I'm dependent on you for my well-being, and when you leave, my literal survival is at risk. Okay, that is a parent or child-to-parent relationship because the child doesn't have the power to take care of themselves until they get older. That would be a legitimate abandonment. An adult leaving an adult because there's toxicity and compatibility involved isn't abandonment. It's ending a relationship, because adult relationships exist on what's called a conditional continuum, meaning they have a start point and an end point. Familial relationships, like parent to child and sibling to sibling, do not have those end points. They are a contiguous relationship that exists throughout life. Whether or not you engage in it, it's still something that's a permanent aspect of your world. Adult relationships are not permanent aspects of your world. They're conditional, so they will have starting points and ending points depending on what's going on. When you accept that, this breaks you free of this idea that you're abandoning somebody. They're a grown-ass adult. They need to take care of themselves. Now, there is one kind of condition in that. If they're disabled in some fashion and they are left without the means to take care of themselves, that would be a form of abandonment. So we can put that clause in there. But most of you guys that I work with, that is not the case. These individuals are grown-ass adults that can take care of themselves. Your job is to give back that responsibility and start to redirect your attention to you and respect what you feel and respect what you're experiencing in the relationship, because you matter first in this. So that's my 2 cents on enmeshment and breaking free of the fantasy of understanding other people's feelings. Let me know if you have any thoughts or questions on this. Be sure to follow me on YouTube, guys. And if you're ready to make that leap into this, check out the options below. I recommend step number 1, Rapid Heal, because we get into the From Addiction to Connection course. We help you break free of this enmeshment. Have a great day, guys. Remember that you're worth knowing, loving, and keeping, and I'll see you guys in our next training.